So thank you for coming. You have in front of you, if you're here, and Kylie, I'll get you one of these. This is just a reference document, and I want to go through it real quick so you know what you got in your hand. First page is just information about the course. Second page is identification of all the sessions, and today we're going to just introduce the principles of art. So the idea and the concept of today is to give you a feel and a background of how the artist works, how they work in the media that they work, what they do to trick the eye, to create a multidimensional situation out of a two-dimensional space. You know, in the case of paintings and mosaics, we'll talk and introduce some of those tricks of line and mass and shape and volume and texture and so forth. And then after today, we're going to use those skills and we're just going to start walking through the story of Christ. So we'll start with the Annunciation and the birth, and we'll go through, you know, the young Christ, and then Christ selecting his disciples, and then his journeys through Jerusalem, all the way up and through the Passion. And I selected that period because there's a lot of great art. A lot of art was sponsored by the Catholic Church, especially starting in the Renaissance. And so there was a lot of money that attracted great artists. And that's where some of the really beautiful pieces sit. Now, obviously, artists have painted the Old Testament, and we'll talk about some of those. We'll do a little bit of a walk into the Sistine Chapel, which is both New Testament and Old Testament. Spends a lot of time on creation. We'll talk about that as well. So that's the length of the session. The one thing I want to point out to you is each session is kind of self-contained. If you miss one, Christ still goes on and does the stuff he does, so it's all right. If you can't participate today, you can pick up any of the sessions. So we also are not going to have a session on March 21st because Diana and I are going to go gallivanting across the country. So that's one where we're going to miss. The next page is a timeline of a couple of different things. So in the red are the periods of art. And I started in the Gothic and Romanesque. There are periods older than this, much older than this. As a matter of fact, the understanding of art, the techniques, and the training and the schools existed in the Greek period and Roman period. And you think about it, there are a lot of Greek and Roman sculpture that's just beautiful, perfectly proportioned. And so they had figured it out. They had figured out perspective and depth and how to work with the stone. And all of that was lost in the Dark Ages. So not just a lot of the art was destroyed, as you know, one group conquers another, they destroy the art, but the way the art was created was destroyed. The math, the science behind it was lost. And when we start and look at the Gothic period here, it was in the early rediscovery of some of that math. You may have, if you're a mathematician or an engineer or somebody who works with statistics, the same thing happened in math, right? There were great advances. It was lost and then rediscovered. So there are arguments about who invented calculus because it was invented twice, you know, things like that. Same type of thing was happening in the world of art. Matter of fact, the Renaissance period or the renewal period wasn't just about art. It was poetry, song, obviously art, sculpture, architecture. And even tapestries and all those things. So you can see all of the major actions or periods of art. This is not a complete list by any means, but you also see some gaps. So if you kind of look from right to left across this timeline, you'll see some gaps, which were, you know, it could have been war, famine, global disease, slowed things down. It could have been, in one case, the Catholic Church saying, no, this is what art is. You're going to do art this way. So there was a little bit of a great development of the Renaissance period, but it actually kind of stymied some other concepts of art. And then as you get into more contemporary time, there's all kinds of periods of art. Matter of fact, this is maybe 10% of the different movements and periods in art that have occurred over the last 100 years. So it's quite interesting. In the gold, I overlaid in there some world events to help give you a bit of context of what was going on. And then in the blue is a list of some of the artists that we're going to investigate, not a complete list. We're going to look at over 200 pieces of art. So just a FYI, that's a lot of artists as well. But it also helps you put some context around, okay, when we talk about a piece that Bellini did, when was it, right? Versus Da Vinci, versus Giotto, versus Michelangelo, versus Picasso, Matisse. Some of the artists, Picasso and Matisse, and these guys just recently, well, in the world of art, recently died, versus artists that lived 800 years ago, right? So there's a lot of range there. This, and that's why this is something you want to keep with you and keep referencing, because if we move through the pieces, you might want to know, okay, well, what's the period of this? Why does it look like it looks? Sometimes it's the advancement of the technology. Sometimes it's the school they follow, and sometimes they just took a left turn and started looking at art a completely different way. Okay. Let's see. We'll break into the principles of art and line, shape, mass, volume, texture, color, and to give you some areas to collect some notes. These are the 4 conicals of painting from the Renaissance, and we'll talk about, you know, who was the master in each one of these areas and how and where they were used. They aren't, when you look at a piece, it could have every one of these methods, but it's important to know what they are, how are they using it. Am I looking at an artist who developed it, or am I looking at an artist who copied it? And that's what an art critic wants to know is, did you do anything original, right? Did you do something significant? And a lot of the artists we know today, we know them because we were told to know them, because a critic appreciates them for what they've done, some development themselves. We have, the next section is a section that talks a little bit about colors and symbols in Christian art. I have a symbols art book that's literally 300 pages long. So, you know, whether there's a certain type of flower, a certain type of tree, or a color, or, you know, this bird above that bird, or to the left of this bird, or next to this, you know, a spear, it all means something. And it may not be absolutely consistent. A lot of the colors are very consistent because the base colors are emotionally driven, okay? So when you look at red, everybody has a certain reaction to red. It's like the bull has a reaction to red, even though it can't see technically red. Blue is calming, green is calming, pink is initially calming, and long-term not so much. So those are, you know, emotional responses to the colors. The artists use these because, again, they're trying to tell a linear story in a static scene. And the color creates a path for the eye, just like line and perspective can create a path for the eye to follow to get a sequential orientation in a static painting. So they'll use all these things as well as to bring emotion out. There's a little reference here about the craft and discipline. One of the interesting things about art is there is a creative side and there is a technical side. So I could be the most creative artist in the world, but if my technique is poor, if the method is poor, in 100 years, no one will know I was any good because it's gone, right? It degrades. And that happens to a lot of art. More art is lost to war. Anybody ever seen the Monuments Men, the movie Monuments Men? If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. It's Second World War, and it's a group of artists, actually started with some emphasis from the government, to try and go and protect these antiquities that were being destroyed in Europe, all across Europe. And the real concern was more than destroyed, they were being collected. So Hitler's vision was to create the greatest museum in the world. And again, unless you kind of know that part of his history, he was an artist before he became a government leader. Okay. And so that's one of the primal things he wanted to do. And he had this huge plan for this museum, and he was collecting everything, stealing everything. And since the Jewish people owned a lot of the art, isn't that convenient? We're collecting them too. So that story, The Monuments Men, is actually from a book, talks about that journey and trying to collect and preserve art. So we'll talk and we'll show examples of painting, sketches, sculpture, architecture, stained glass, illuminated manuscripts, and some videography, and we'll get into some of that today. There's 2 big pages where you can keep notes, and I kind of split it. I'm feeding you what you probably would ultimately want to get at the end of this. A little bit about the artist. What artists are we talking about? General notes about the painting, how to appreciate it, what kind of method and technique was used. So you can continue to carry this. And then the last is references. So there's a whole table back there in the back of art reference books. And I just want to give credit to where a lot of this comes from. I think it's interesting to me, and it brings me closer to the Word of God. You know, I have a great interest in art, and I got a book called The Illustrated Life of Christ probably 30 years ago, and started developing this course, and I've delivered it, I don't know, a dozen times or so. And every time I get into it, I learn more. I learn more about the history of Christ, the history of art, the history of these artists. A lot of them were creating commentary of their own time, and they were allowed to do it because they were the greatest minds and greatest artists of their time. So they put things into their painting that would get a lot of people killed and definitely get their works destroyed, but they couldn't, governments couldn't do it, wouldn't do it. And so they were allowed to provide this commentary out to their contemporary space. And so that's always interesting to me when I see a composition. It's definitely a story of Christ, but it's not, you know, they're not wearing the gowns of Christ. They're wearing armor from 400 years later. And you're going, okay, I understand what the story is, but I need to understand what the story is being told from an artist's perspective and why. So that's some stuff we'll get into as well. This opening piece it's called The Head of Christ. It's actually a replica of a piece that's in the catacombs of Saint Domitilia. And it is considered, and not everybody agrees with this, but it's considered to be a 1st or 2nd century picture of Christ. So what did Christ look like? Anybody know what Christ looked like? So it's a really interesting question. There are many people that say there's nothing in the Bible that tells you what Christ looked like. That is not true. Look at Revelation. John spent a lot of time telling you what Christ looks like when he comes. White robes, white beard, you know, compared to all kinds of visualizations that people could reference. So it isn't true that Christ isn't described, because he's definitely described in Revelation. That's not necessarily what he looked like when he was hanging around Galilee. But there are also several paintings that are in this time era, which would put them in, from an artist's perspective, in an interview of what did Christ look like. Okay. The pieces from that time generally state he had a reddish blonde hair, he had a 2-pronged beard, and you can see that in this painting as well. And there are 6 or 7 somewhat survived catacomb cave paintings that have these same features, even going into coloration of the eye. Well, okay, then you go, well, wait a minute, he's Jewish. Is that possible? Yes, there was a group of Jewish people that had reddish blonde hair that had the same long features. He was not super tall, but not short. So there's nothing definitive to say here's a painting of Christ. The thing that's interesting about this is I got this from a sketch that was in a book that was published in 1906. That's a neat thing to me. What's significant about 1906? What do you think? No World War I, no World War II. We lost thousands of pieces of art in those two wars. Okay, so anything written in 1906 can have references to stuff that doesn't exist anymore, and this book does. It talks about it. It shows it's all black and white because this was before, printing, especially in color, was easy. But it has references to things that don't exist anymore, and it has commentary to those references, which is even more unique. So I actually got this book. I went to a friend of mine's Bible study. He invited me, free breakfast. I went, so that was easy. And when I get there, we broke up into small groups, and I'm at a table with 4 or 5 people, and one of them is the pastor, and we were talking about one of Paul's writings, and Thessalonians, and I started talking about some reference artwork, and the pastor gets up and walks away, and I thought, wow, that must have been a really boring story. And he comes back a minute later and he hands me this book, and I open the book, and it's old. It's typeset printing. Okay, I don't know if some of you know what that is, but that's where you take an A and then a B and then a C, and then you put it all together, and you print it out in a long line. You fold it, and then you take a knife and you cut the open edge of the book, and now you've got a book. You bind it. And in the front of that book, it said, Merry Christmas, 1923. Okay. But the book was published in 1906. So, to me, it's one of those God things, because I was getting ready, I was preparing for this, and here I have a new reference, right? And it talked a lot about, is there not a description of Christ? But if you think about it, I'm following Christ around for 3 years. We're hanging out. He gets crucified. Somebody's going to ask me, what was this Christ guy like? What did he look like? So, you always ask that. What's he look like? So it's hard for me to believe that somebody didn't try to document that. And there's some evidence that it might have happened. So, but I digress. I'm going to move forward here a little bit. Again, the study in general, I have over 300 pieces. We're going to look at about 200. I had the opportunity to see a lot of these firsthand. I traveled quite extensively with work. I had 3 years running where I was 42, 45, 46 weeks a year traveling. I had 1 year I was in Europe 17 times. So been to Asia, South America, all over the place. And one of the things I tried to do was find a museum. Right before I leave, I would usually try to leave a little early, get in the cab, and tell the cab, take me to your favorite church, favorite museum. We'll just hang out for a while. And 9 times out of 10, the cabbie would turn off the meter, and we would just go. And they would have incredible stories about their town, their village, their whatever it was. And then I would get the backroom tour of some church and see some incredible pieces. So I've seen about half of the pieces that we're going to look at in person. And I say that because I want you to think about doing that. I want you to go, and the Indianapolis Art Museum, the Chicago Museum, incredible museums, and a lot of these pieces tour. So if you're kind of paying attention, you can get to see it. And to see it in a book is one thing. To see it on the wall or in the ceiling of a church in a mosaic is a completely different experience. And so in a lot of cases, I'll try to include the size of the piece, because some of the pieces we're going to look at, like Rembrandt would paint anywhere from here to here, that size. Caravaggio has a piece in St. Mark's in Venice that's 130 feet long, 30 feet high. Took him 20 years. He was busy 20 years. I mean, it's incredible. And it's the wedding at Cana. Think about that. It's this huge scene of all these people celebrating this wedding. And in the midst of all the chaos is Mary going, hey, they're running out of wine. You know, in this little scene in the corner, it's absolutely cool. Absolutely cool. All right. So that's that. We talked about where we're going to go with this. And again, this first session is just to really introduce the principles of art. And we will just, chronologically walk through the journeys of Christ. How did he start? Where did he start? Where did he go? Who did he select? Who was out to get him? And there's some controversy on that too, as well. So in this intro, even though we're going to just look at the concepts of art, I did want to introduce a few pieces and kind of introduce you to what we're going to do following. So this is Angel in a Storm by J.M. Turner. It was done in 1846. So compared to what we're going to look at, this is pretty contemporary. Okay. It's 35 by 35 inches. It is, you look at it and you go, it's not clear what it is. It is intended to not be clear what it is. That's what he intended. I think most people will say, oh, I see something in there. And if you say it's an angel, they go, okay, I see there's an angel in there. So this isn't, in a period piece, this isn't what we call realism, right? Because realism tends to look like a photograph. So that's not what it is. It's a little bit of impressionism, but it's designed for you to sit there and look at it, right? And just take it in and let your mind create what the story is. When I talk to people about how to appreciate art, I tell them a couple simple things. I say, sit down in front of it and just enjoy it. The very first thing, don't deconstruct it. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't say, well, what period is this and what were they trying? Just enjoy it. So take it in and for what it is. Then you'll take some of the principles we're going to talk about and think, well, what is the artist doing? So how are they playing with this two-dimensional space and trying to draw me into it? Where are the dark spots and where are the light spots? And where did my eye first go without any training? Where did my eye go? And why did it go there? Okay. Are there depths? Are there highlights? Is there an outreach? Is there forced perspective? And look at it that way. And then the last thing that I always find fun is, who is the artist? What was their time? What was the genre from which they lived? What are they trying to say? Were they talking about just the story they're depicting, or were they also, is there a double entendre? Is there another message here? So if you don't take anything from this, that's one thing that I would recommend. When you view a piece of art, just enjoy it. Just enjoy it. Then look at, why was I looking in certain areas, and some of those tricks that Greg talked about, are they in here? And then who is this artist and what was driving him? So I did want to talk too about what does the Bible say about art? Okay, there's a reference in Exodus 35 that talks about an artist, Bezalel. Okay, and Bezalel was an artist, according to the description, that was gifted with craft, intellect, imagination, wisdom. And if you talk about archetypes, types, and archetypes, archetype is the ultimate place we want to get to. The type is where we start. Archetype is a transition to the archetype. If you talk about Bezalel was commissioned to build the tabernacle for Moses. So God gives Moses the vision for the tabernacle. Moses passes that vision to Bezalel and another artistic individual, and they created the tabernacle. And if you read some of the Old Testament and the intricacies of the tabernacle, it was just incredible. And it was all done with tents. When we think of a tent, it's flapping in the wind. They built a tent that there was basically a curtain in that tent that was like 1.5 feet thick. So it wasn't like what we think of as a tent. Fast forward God gave David a vision for the temple. Okay. But David didn't build the temple. David passed the vision on to Solomon, who was given all the wisdom of God, you know. So Solomon used that wisdom, craft, art, and he created the temple. And the vision came from God down to David and then translated. Okay. So type, ectype, and the archetype. What is the archetype? Well, the archetype is Jesus. What did Jesus say about the temple? Rebuild that thing in 3 days. We'll get it up. And people are going, well, it took like 600 years to build that thing. What are you talking about? He was talking about a completely different temple. He was talking about a temple that wouldn't be destroyed, that couldn't be destroyed. Okay. But when you link the Old Testament in Ezekiel and talking about building the tabernacle, building the temple, and then Jesus referencing building the temple, they were talking about Jesus every time. Okay. So again, when you peel art back, right, it's in the Bible. It describes what good art is. And that I thought this example was fabulous, where they talk about God describing to Moses, describing to Bezalel, and then God describing to David, and David describing to Solomon, and then Jesus coming and building a temple that can't be destroyed. You know. So, what is art? I think is a good question. Where's my pointer? Oh, I forgot to do this. I'm manually keeping these things aligned. I'll tell you if it works or not. So, are you with me, Anna? All right, got a thumbs up from Anna. So, can somebody read that for me? AJ, go for it.
All right. What defines good art? Art is a gift to the artist and creator who built beauty and meaning into all his works. The Bible describes how God also gives people artistic talent. Bezalel, the tabernacle artist in Exodus 35:30-35, is a good example. His artistic gifts, God-given inspiration, skill, intelligence, knowledge, and craftsmanship sum up what it takes to be a good artist and show what constitutes true art and what doesn't. A good work of art exhibits both unity and complexity, characteristics of our God. God's works are intricate yet organized. Psalm 104:16-25.
So when I read this, I think of sunsets and sunrises, that I wake up in the morning and I just go, God, you are really good at this. I mean, it's just spectacular. The colors, the construct, the contrast, and it keeps changing. So if you sit there and look at a sunrise for 5 minutes, it's not, you're remembering back what it looked like, because it's all changed. And it just keeps changing. And it's different every day. And he's created that, you know, on his palette, with his palette and his canvas. And I think that's what this reference is, the biblical reference, when you talk about what does God say about craft and art and how he constructed the universe, and his imagination to create what he created, and the way he created it, and the dependencies of animals to plants and plants to animals to survive is just it's just a wonder. And I see the same thing in art. And when I see painters try to recreate these stories, you know, they're expressing their God-given gifts of imagination and craft, and they're providing commentary on their time. What's that? Sure, read the Psalm 104. Read that one. Diane, she's the one that contracted you.
Where does it start? 16. Trees of the Lord are well watered, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. There the birds make their nest. The stork has its home in the junipers. The high mountains belong to wild goats.
Well,
Crags are a refuge for the hyrax. He made the moon to mark the seasons, and the sun knows when to go down. You bring darkness, it becomes night. All the beasts of the forest prowl. The lions roar for their prey and seek their food from God. The sun rises, and they steal away. They return and lie down in their dens. Then people go out to their work, their labor until evening. How many are your works, Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. There is a sea vast and spacious, teeming with creatures beyond number, living things both large and small.
Thanks, Jay. But it talks about there's order and there's chaos. And this reference of art to the Bible is talking about art does have order, right? And without order, you kind of go, is it art? I look at a lot of art today and I go, yeah, I'm not sure that's art. But and so I kind of take a biblical reference. I try to look at life from a biblical lens. And it gives guidance as to what art really is, what good art really is, and examples of who they are. This is one of my favorite pieces. There's a lot going on here. Just anybody know what this scene might be? Yeah, this is actually called Echo Homo, or Behold the Man. So the guy, I'll point, you guys can see it, maybe. Where am I? There we go. That's Pilate in the middle, okay? Obviously, this is Jesus. These are some of the bystanders that either brought him here or want him there. But the most interesting character in this scene is right here. It's Pilate's wife, okay? What's different about Pilate's wife in this picture than everybody else in the picture? She's facing us. Everybody else is facing away. Of course, the crowds are in front of Pilate, and this is where he gets to the point of, Christ or Barabbas. Which one? What do you want? He's busy. He's got things to do. This is, we know this is a huge event. Pilate is just, okay, I got stuff on the agenda today. I need to move on. But his wife knows better. So what's cool about this is his wife has just told him, don't do anything here. Get out of this. Don't be part of this. She is stumbling and reaches for her servant to even just hold her up. Okay. And she is facing away from him. And that tells you, you're crazy. You're going the wrong way. What are you doing? I've done all I can do. I'm leaving. Right. So there's a lot going on in this piece. It is, let's see, 1871. So it's fairly recent. It was painted over 20 years. Okay. That tells you a couple things. One, it's oil. You can keep painting an oil paint forever. Basically, it stays wet. That's why artists like oils, because you can also paint over an oil. Canvases and boards, which were what most painters painted on. A lot of these were planks. So you get a good woodworker, and you want an absolutely smooth plank that's already been dried and it's not going to crack, right? And I paint something. I look at it and I go, this is no good. I don't throw the board away. I scrape off the paint and I paint another thing, or I just paint over it. And they're actually, I think in our Bible study in the morning, remember the piece that there were the two people in the field, and there was a pile of potatoes, and they were, giving thanks for their bounty. That original piece was those two people were the mother and father of someone their child they just buried. The artist changed it, and when you look at it, you think, wow, look at the reverence for the bounty that the earth has brought, right? It's because he didn't paint them standing over the bounty. He painted them standing over their dead child. But he recognized that he captured that and wanted to change the story. So, that kind of stuff is really cool to me. they x-ray these pieces to see if there's layers, multiple layers underneath and what might have been there. But there's some really famous paintings that have 3 or 4 versions underneath them. And when you understand that transition and how they got there, sometimes it's a meaningless story, sometimes it's a story like this, you know. So kind of cool stuff. Let's see. Yeah, pilot and Bravinus. There's a technique used here for pilot. It's called foreshortening. And a lot of us more recently, you have these sidewalk artists that use chalk on the sidewalk and make it look like there's a hole or there's an animal coming at you. That's forced perspective. It's not coming at you, it's a flat surface, but the way they've drawn it, it actually looks like it's coming at you, or the sidewalk drops and, oh, watch out, and people will walk around it even though there's nothing really there. That's what's being used here. So you get the feeling in this 2-dimensional space of depth, okay? This piece is really unique because the depth is brighter than the front. Normally, artists use darkness to show the dark corners, the deep corners, the long corners. In this case, the brightest thing is the farthest thing away. And then pilots exaggerated, leaning over the wall there, yelling, "Hey, who do you want? I gotta go. Who do you want?" So anyway, a lot of neat stuff going on here in this piece.
Who painted this?
This is, I can't see it because Anna's over the top of it. What is this?
Don't blame me.
I gotta move you, hold on.
When was this event painted?
1871 to 1891, and this is the one that was painted over 20 years.
Did you notice in there's in the crowd in the back? That's not the thing. You can only see one man's face in that triangle down there. Right, Virginia?
Oh, yeah.
That's like the only face you can see.
Yeah, and so the new Apple phone came out with 3 cameras, right? You know why they do that? So I can focus on you and focus on you at the same time. And then when I edit it, I can decide which one I want to take, right? And if I'm doing a movie, you guys seen that commercial where they focus on the driver and then they think, so I guess I'm more important now? He goes, no, I don't think so. That's what they're doing. Well, in a painting, you got to pick. You can't focus on both. However, it's a painting, you can do whatever you want, right? So you'll see things that the eye normally could not see by focusing on someone in the background and someone in the foreground, or you'll see a long distance village with great detail because the artist was really good at landscapes, and then some marginal talent on the people in the foreground because they can, right? Because it's not a camera, they can do whatever they want. But they use that trick to get you to look at both places, because if you took it with a camera, you had to pick one. Okay, zoom out, zoom in, okay, now, right? Whatever isn't in focus isn't in focus, and that's it. But with a painting, I can make you look at the individual in the foreground and the individual in the background and tell a sequential story then. This is used in The Prodigal Son. Paintings of the Prodigal Son. Why? Because in this painting of this landscape, there's the prodigal son way off coming. And there's the father waiting at the edge of his property, right? And he can see that. And then you move to the left in the same painting, and the same son is there, and the same father is there in the foreground, and they're celebrating. And then move to the right, and there's the older brother sulking in the corner. But they're all in perfect focus because that's what the artist wanted you to see. So there's all kinds of tricks being used here. And I couldn't figure out how to get Anna's face out of the way, which is, not that I want to. Thank you.
There are a lot of echoes, apparently, it's also
That's okay. All right. So we've been through this a little bit, and this is just a reference. We're going to talk about different artists over the period. So I'm going to move on. All right, we're going to talk about principles of art: line, shape, mass, value, texture, and color. These 6 basic principles of sketch are fundamental, okay? But they're also progressive. So I can be an artist and be, very, very good with line. The better I'm in with the line, the better I'm going to be with shape and the creation of shapes. The better I am with shapes, the better I am at providing that illusion of mass, that illusion of volume. The better I am with line and mass, the better I can manage texture. And then on top of all that, because I can have a black and white sketch, right? And pretty good painting. But if I can add color to it, now I can bring emotion into it. I can do all kinds of crazy things with color and how I show. So again, this is a progression of artistic talent and technique. And most of us start with line. Who drew a stick man when they were 5 years old? Everybody draws a stick man. I still draw a stick man. This piece to the right is actually by Greg Weddle, famous artist, in 2002. And she was 7 years old. And we're going to talk about this after we go through these concepts of line. Okay. So if we start with line, this is a piece by Titian, and it's the crucifixion of Christ, or it's the scourging of Christ. But a line may be known as a path of a moving point, as the edge of a flat shape, axis of a shape, or as a contour of a solid object. If you're an engineer, a line has no width, right? Because a line is a series of points. Point has no width. In the world of art, you can have a thick line, you can have a thin line, line that changes thick to thin. A line might be a line by itself, or it might be the edge of a surface, okay? So if you look at this piece by Titian, Titian is an artist that's very gifted with mass and volume and creating depth. And if you look at like the arm of the guy holding the stick, this is a massive dude, right? He's there to keep the peace, right? But even Christ, who's kind of leaning towards him, is somewhat massive. You'll see artists that prefer sculpture paint like this. Michelangelo, he painted, he hated it. He was a sculptor. Okay, so when he was asked to do the Sistine Chapel, it wasn't, yes, I got the commission for the Sistine Chapel. It was a punishment because Michelangelo had exposed the Pope for his concubines and children. Oops. So he got to, and it wasn't actually painting the frescoes in the Sistine Chapel. He got to tear down the frescoes that were in there, put new frescoes up, and then paint those. And then he had to keep it all operational so they could hold conclave if the Pope died. Okay. And if anybody been to the Sistine Chapel? It's impressive, right? So how would you keep that thing open and still be able to paint and put plaster all over the, the surfaces, and not crush a Pope? And there's a book called The Pope's Ceiling, and 90% of that book is about the project management of putting the scaffolding in place so he could do that job. And 5% is about going to find pigments from all over the region in Europe. And then 5% is about painting it. So kind of interesting. But this is Titian. There's a lot of action in here, and the lines are these angles, and so there's some frantic activity. But if you look at Christ, pretty calm. Okay, so there's this dichotomy of the space within the picture, and we'll show you. We're going to go through why that is. What's in here that makes you think there's something unsettling in part of this, and there's something calm in another part. We're going to talk a little bit about how line is used in mood. Gravity makes us think about vertical and horizontal lines as comfortable. Nothing's going to happen here. Everything's safe. Everything's good. Nothing to worry about. There is no next moment, right? It's just still. But a diagonal line, something's about to happen. it's going to fall. Somebody should go catch that. What's going on, right? And that's, the artist knows that. They know the psyche of the individual that's looking at a piece, and they know that if you put a diagonal in a painting, somebody's going to want to, well, gosh, somebody should go up there and catch that. And they'll use that to create havoc in the mind. Because what are they trying to do? They're trying to create a mood in a two-dimensional environment, because your emotion when you look at a painting is just as much as the appreciation of the technique, right? So there's other forms, there's forms in tension. So if you think about this and think about gravity, the idea of this is, you know what? It's not going to necessarily fall over. It might be leaning a little bit, but there's definitely tension inside here. In other words, you ever seen a branch of a tree leaning way far out and it's taken a couple of hits, it's cracked a little bit, and you go, man, that's impressive that that tree is holding that limb. And that's what this is. These are interesting because an artist will grab onto a structure like this and they'll overlay a human body, right? Or they'll overlay some destruction or some event that's about to happen. And once they find something that's successful for them, they'll reuse it again and again and again and again. So from an art appreciation person, it's a good way to recognize that form. And I go, well, that's Rubens, because he uses that form all the time. I don't have to know anything about the piece. I know exactly what it is. Or it's from the school of Rubens because he's been teaching all his students that. So they'll reuse it and reuse it once they find an effective method. Motion, this is pretty basic. So what does this make you think about? It's supposed to make you think about looking to the right, see what's over there, or there's some kind of a motion activity going on. Same with this form, that form. So you'll see a straight line with a knob at the end of it. It makes you look towards that direction. And the artist may want you to look directly at that knob, or they may want you to look across the painting to where that's pointing. Okay, arrows are done that way. And then variations in the thickness, it's faster, right? That's the implication of that form. This is one of my favorite ones. Okay, so the lines on the left, they're parallel lines, right? The two lines here are the same length, and the line over here is a contiguous line. However, they're not parallel lines anymore. No, they are. But the hash lines, they're tricking your mind. Your mind is seeing the same thing it was seeing a second ago, but the hash lines force you to believe there's motion within those vertical components. Okay? Now, you ponder that for a second, right? Because you know, and you can tell yourself, those are parallel lines, but you can't see it. Because there's something in your head that's telling you they're not parallel lines, okay? So if I'm an artist and I wanted to play with you a little bit, that's what I would do, okay? Those two lines are not the same length anymore. Now, you know those lines are the same length, right? Because we just looked at it, but they're not the same length because your head's telling you they're not the same length, okay? And now, why is that valuable in the structure of a painting, a piece of canvas or a board? I have this much space. I have to depict two different things, and I can use these tricks to say those two things are not the same; they're different. Because your mind's going to tell you that. And this is one of those weird ones where it's not a continuous line anymore. It jumps. You know it's a continuous line because it just showed you it was a continuous line, but it's not a continuous line. Your mind is telling you it's not a continuous line. You could look at that all day and it will never be a continuous line. I've done this. I've stared at, especially that one on the left. I'm going to fix this. I know they're parallel, and you can't get your mind to see it in any other way. So there's tricks like this that the artists use, and then there's a lot more than this. But I think these are fun ones just to look at and kind of play with. All right, so when we take all of these little tricks and ways lines work, what does that mean in art, a piece of art? So this is Picasso, and you can squint, it's just hard to see. This is Picasso. He paid his rent with this. There were two little gals in Picasso's hometown. He lived in the upper room, and he lived there a long time. but never had any money, never sold anything, never made much money of any kind until later in his life. But he would pay rent with this. So when these two ladies died, they opened up their apartment and they had thousands of Picasso sketches. Their family's doing just fine, just fine. But what's neat about this is there's a couple things going on with the world of lines. So if you look at the lines of the chair, even though they're coming at you, so there's some perspective here, it's sturdy, it's stable, it's not falling over. She's fine. She's in that big chair. She's very rotund. She's a big woman. And so he uses some of the lines of the perimeter to create this mass that says, hey, Dr. Clarabelle was big gal, big gal. But then he uses some different work within the ruffles in her shirt and the ruffles on her sleeves to talk about the softness of her, right? And the sensitivity of her. And, so he's using all of this, and he literally sketched this in like 30 seconds because you got to pay the rent, got to get that out. But this is a neat, it's not a very good picture. There is an unbelievable picture that Picasso did, and it's like 7 feet high. It's probably 3 or 4 feet wide, and it's a sketch. It's just a sketch. And it's called Boy and a Horse. And so it's a little boy, and he's holding the reins of this horse. The horse is huge, and the little boy looks even smaller because he's standing next to this huge horse. And he is, he's just used a few lines. So it's not like he did shading. There's no shading in it at all. But he's massive, and the muscles inside this horse and the width of the chest of the horse just dwarfs this little boy. And there's like 50 lines in the whole thing, right? Just amazing. There's a story, Picasso came to teach at a university in the United States. He wasn't feeling very well. The class is in there. It's kind of an auditorium type class. You got chalkboards, and he comes up to the chalkboard, and they're yelling questions at him. And he looks at the chalkboard, and he grabs a piece of chalk, makes a circle, and he puts a dot in the middle, and he walks out. There was no lecture. That was it. And they're complaining about what this is. And wait a minute, I came here and I paid a lot of money. And what's this? And they start looking at the circle, and they look at the circle, and they go, man, that's like a perfect circle. So they go up and they start measuring this thing, and it was a perfect circle. And they go, man, that dot looks like it's right in the center of that circle. And it was right in the center of the circle. So Picasso was sick. He was tired, but he was still in command of his visual and spatial, at a level that none of us understand, right? So he wanted to show him that in his 3-second drawing. And they all went up there and studied this circle. I mean, imagine that. I'm gonna look at the circle. We're gonna measure the circle. Did it in a few seconds. Those are the kind of gifts that most of us don't have, right? I can draw a circle, but I'm not gonna be perfect. And I generally can find the middle, but it's not the exact middle. And it's gonna take me a lot more than 3 seconds to do it. Yeah, so the different kind of gifts for different people. This is Max Beckman, again, talking about line and the effects of line. This makes you nervous to look at it, right? So he's using this kind of hashed, frantic motion that he's conveyed onto the painting, because he's not still drawing it. He's not here. He's done. But you can see that he wanted to make sure that he was conveying some concern, right? So a lot of artists like to paint themselves, right? Rembrandt is the king of painting himself. There's a lot of Rembrandt paintings of Rembrandt. We're going to look at another piece by him, but Rembrandt's known to paint with a brush that has a single hair. And he spent a lot of time on those. I've seen, there's a famous, in Amsterdam, there's a famous self-portrait of Rembrandt. It's like this big. When I studied it in books, I thought it was, like this. And then when I saw it, it's super dark, and it's this big, and you have to get right on it, and you can see the hairs growing out of his cheek. It's crazy. there's mental stuff going on there, right? This is not normal. And he painted himself constantly. But Max here wants to convey that Max has got some concerns going on. So if you painted yourself like this and gave it to your psychologist, they go, we probably need to talk a bit, right? But he was also a gifted artist, and he conveyed it very well. We're going to look a little bit about perspective. So this is Masaccio's tribute money. This is a neat painting because it depicts three different things going on in the scene. In the center, Jesus is coming up, and just to the right of Jesus in the orange tunic is Peter. Okay, and the guy to the left of Jesus, our right, is the guy from town going, "Hey, where's your token for coming? We got to support the synagogue and got to pay for the teachers and all that stuff." And Jesus tells him, and there's Peter off on the left, he pulling money out of the mouth of a fish. Okay. And then here's Peter off to the right, and he's paying his tribute money. Okay. So it's one painting, and Peter gets in there 3 times. And what Masaccio is doing is telling a story. A couple of sidelights to this. So what do we learn about Peter off there catching his fish? Well, obviously, you take your tunic off when you're working. Why is that interesting? It's interesting because art fills in a lot of gaps of life in the time of the artist. Okay. There are tools that are shown in art that we've looked at and couldn't figure out what the heck they were. And you see it in a piece of art and you go, oh my gosh, that's what that's for. There are towns depicted in the background of art that have been destroyed by wars, those pictures have been used to reconstruct towns. You've ever been to Rothenburg? Yeah, that town was leveled, or what they call raised. There wasn't a stick on a stick, but it's perfectly preserved, and it's perfectly preserved in a time that isn't after World War II, which is when it was reconstructed. It was built, I think, in some kind of the 1700s timeframe. It was they didn't have architectural designs of the town. They had paintings that used the town, and that's how they reconstructed the town. So there's a lot of neat things you can learn in paintings, and that's just one of the things here. When you go fishing, you got to take your tunic off, and you gird your loins. You see his legs; he's pulled his loins up and he's girded them, and so that's how you work. There's no question about how you work. There's nothing in the Bible that tells you this stuff, but here's a painting that depicts it, and this is an old painting too. But one of the things we want to talk about is perspective. So the perspective of this building, this is single point perspective, and all the lines of this go to Jesus's face. Now, your mind knew that because your mind knew where the artist wanted you to look. Now you knew that because the lines of perspective were drawn by your mind into that point, that the infinity point, which is where Christ stands. You can use multi-point perspective to get the mind and eye to look in the left of the painting and up over in the upper right and down at the bottom. You can also use perspective to change the position of the viewer. Okay. So let's talk about that. So lines, when there is more than one vanishing point, it's called multi-point perspective. This may be used to emphasize certain objects in the composition or to create for the viewer an unusual experience. So one of the fun things that I like to do is in the lower right here, there's a box. And you can just barely see in the box. I really want to know what's in that box. Okay. So when you look at it, your mind is telling you, we should lean up a little bit and look inside the box. Now, there's no looking in the box. It's a two-dimensional space. You can't see in the box. But I could draw the box. So I'm looking and it's open, but I can't see in it at all. And it really, really makes me want to look up. The thing that'll just twist your mind, though, is I can draw the box where I can't see it. I'm looking at the bottom of the box on the bottom of the page, and I can draw the box on top of the page that I'm looking down inside. You can't even figure out where you're supposed to be because one of them tells you you're above the painting looking down, and the other one tells you you're below the painting looking up. Okay. The artist uses this to help you understand that there's more than one scene in a painting. Okay. So when you look at it, and again, this is the after the just sit and enjoy, and it's when you start to dissect it, you go, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Why is this doing this? And what is the artist trying to do? This second, the 1-12, that extreme perspective, which moves the vanishing point close to the back of the building, makes me feel like I'm much closer to the building, right? Because I'd have to be close to the building to see that extreme line of the top of the building in the back. If they move that vanishing point away, it almost looks like parallel lines between the bottom of the building and the top of the building, and it pushes me away from the painting, even though I'm still standing in the exact same place. Okay. So, again, this is the trick of an artist. They can use these to create different moods. They can use this to change your position. I've seen people move in front of a painting because the perspective is telling them they should be farther back or close. It's the funniest thing when you go to a big museum, people are moving up, sitting back. And then the curators will put those benches, yeah, they play with you. They put them too far back and people lean forward. It's really funny. So shape is just using line to create a shape, and same type of concept with just a basic line. So if you look at 117, 118, 119, they're strong standard, they're comfortable, there's nothing really happening there. But when you look at 20, something's going on. There's twist, there's movement, there's action. So the artist, by using these complex shapes, can create action in a static picture. And we're going to see a really good example of that here coming up. It can also create a journey, right? So what's funny about perspective, which we just talked about, it's easy to see this when it's a building, right? I can see the top line of the building and the bottom line of the building, and I can see where the windows are going. But put a human face there, more complicated, right? So an artist can do that, can take the human face and put it wherever they want and put the vanishing point wherever they want. There is no top of the building and bottom building, but there's the jawline, there's the top of the head, there's the arches around, and they can move the face up and down and create, that kind of environment. And that just speaks to the fact that they're kind of they're working at a different level than the rest of us. Okay. So this is cool. This is Picasso. Oil on canvas, it's 6 feet 7 inches by like 6'6". It's a huge piece. And it's called The Musicians. This is in Picasso's Cubist period. He is painting a picture of music. Okay. So if you talk to a deaf person and you're asked to explain what music is, this is what Picasso was trying to do. There's all kinds of tricks going on here. Underneath the table and to the left, there's a dog. You can just barely see the dog's head to the left of the what is it? The marionette. Yeah. So the marionette's a harlequin and it's a monk, left to right. And then you can see the dog's tail between the legs of the harlequin. Okay. Picasso is the harlequin. He always painted himself as a harlequin. Okay. I don't know why he did. And the monk is singing. You can see his mouth wide open. See that? Now that I've told you that that's his mouth. He's singing. The harlequin's playing a guitar, and the marionette is playing the clarinet. Yeah. So, but if you think about all the shapes we talked about, he's not using boxes and triangles. He's using these weird shapes because he wants a lot of motion and activity within the piece. Mass. So this is Rubens. Rubens is well known for mass. And this is one of those great examples about the combination of lines. So we got the diagonal lines, which gives action and chaos to everyone around the perimeter of this picture. But look at Christ. There's not action. It's calm. So he's the calm in the middle of the storm. This is like the Christ calms the storm where everybody around him is freaking out. The boat's about to go down and Christ is sleeping in the front. You know, this is the same scene. So when I read the story of calming the sea, and I read the story of the crucifixion, I see them as the same story, right? Christ is there, he's calm, he's got his control, he understands what's going on. Everyone around is in chaos. Everyone around is going, what just happened? My world is just destroyed, it's broken, it's the end, who am I gonna follow next? And that's kind of where everybody else is. So it's a great one. He uses some chiaroscuro and Savato, we're going to talk about in a second, to create this mass of a person. In other words, it's not a flat stick figure, it's a volume, it's a person, it's, you know, reaching out. And that's what he was an expert in. This is a Rembrandt. Okay, this is really left field Rembrandt. Normally, Rembrandt, again, he painted with a single haired brush. So the detail is incredible. One thing that's consistent about his work, it's very, very dark. One reason it's very, very dark is he used a lot of tempera, which is an egg emulsion, to capture and hold the pigment versus oil. And a lot of tempera became very, very dark over time. But in general, he painted very, very dark. And he was doing that because he wanted the contrast between light and dark, okay? So one of the other interesting things about this piece is, where is the source of light in this piece? Jesus, right? It's supernatural, okay? It's reflected on the two friends. This is supper at Emmaus, by the way, okay? So this is when the two men, after they've walked this journey to Emmaus, and they've had this, you know, traveler that followed them and asked questions and answered questions, and then they sit down and this is where they realize, oh, this was Jesus. I didn't know. And so that's why the light is done the way it's done. And most likely this little servant individual was somebody who paid for the piece. That's pretty well established that they got their picture, you know, saved forever. What's that?
Thanks for supporting me. Here's you next to Jesus.
Oh, there's some really, you know, sold out stuff. Oh man, a lot of popes and bishops, and yeah, one of the big things is when you construct a piece, you never put people over Jesus. It's Catholic Church, right? You never put people over Mary, and there's several where the bishop is even with Mary, and then you'll see a peacock with its tail open in the scene, which is vanity. So the bishop is too stupid. He doesn't know what it means. And he goes, oh, look at this great piece. And then he goes, shows it to everybody, and everybody's going, cool. Yeah, great. That's nice. Yeah, exactly. All right, let's see. So that's just a kind of an exaggerated close-up of it. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There's so the tablecloth, you can see some folds in the tablecloth, like we just got it out. If you look at pictures of the Last Supper, Da Vinci's Last Supper, the tablecloth is over the table. Everybody's on one side of the table because that's how they ate. I'm kidding. But the tablecloth is clearly just taken out of the drawer, and it's folded, and it talks to is Passover feast, right? So gotta rush, get it right out of the thing, lay it down, no time to iron, just put it on. So there's little things all over the painting that you go, oh, I they're trying to say something here. This is what's going on. All right. This is Leonardo. Leonardo da Vinci was he was an artist, he was an engineer, he was an architect. There is the Duomo in Florence. It's a church that they built, beautiful church, but it stood 200 years without a dome over the basilica because they didn't know how to do it. Story is, Da Vinci walks in, looks at it, takes a napkin, sketches how to do it, gives it to him and leaves, and that's how they built it. just showed up, looked at it and go, that's what you need to do. Brilliant, brilliant guy. There's anatomy books today have Da Vinci's anatomy sketches in them. The detailed nerves, veins, just skeletal, which means he was digging people up and pulling them apart. That's what it means. A lot of artists did that. That was illegal, but he's an artist. So, but just a brilliant guy. So this is the same scene in about 10 years apart, different coloration, but they both have the base of blue. Black is a color of death, and it could be with white is the color of hope. But blue is definitely the color of hope. You see the exaggeration of the triangle, okay, in the blue. That's the Trinity. But look at the face of Mary, okay? This is Da Vinci. What's Da Vinci's most famous painting? Mona Lisa. Look at that face. It's Mona Lisa, you know? Artist doesn't come too far from the barn. I've heard people talk about, oh, they painted Jesus like a white guy, or they painted Jesus like this. And the reality is most of these painters, now these guys did travel, but most of these painters never traveled more than like 10 miles from their house. So everybody looked like a cousin, right? And so they paint Jesus like they see people. You got to put it in context. You got to put everything in context. And, you know, Jesus is described as, you know, any man, right? And then God made us in his image. So that's the image I know. So that's what I'm going to paint. The church was also, especially the early Christian church, was really concerned about idoling. And so any kind of a idol indication would be shunned. They didn't like that. The Renaissance is what reestablished painting of stories of Christ and the stories of the Bible in general, because the Roman and Greeks went so far overboard with idols and gods. And so there was this natural pendulum swing back that occurred. So Da Vinci is kind of the inventor of this sfumato, and his definition is without lines, borders in the manner of smoke beyond. So when you look at the edge of a shoulder, you won't see a line. It just kind of blends into whatever is in front or behind them. The chiaroscuro is light to dark, or the clear tonal contrast uses to volume. So when you looked at the Rubens piece, where you see these huge, massive bodies and arms, and you can see the muscles inside the arms, it's all about using the tonal contrast to give you that image in the space. Cagnetti is characterized by painters changing different colors. So you got to realize back in early Renaissance, especially, they didn't have 264 colors in the crayon box. They just didn't. You know, their palette may have 5 or 6 colors, and so they use browns and blacks or whites to lighten or darken a color. And so when you think about just sketching something and you shade it with your pencil, it's one thing. It's pretty easy to do. You make it real dark at the edge and lighter in the middle. But when you have to colorize it, how do you make it darker and darker and darker without changing it to everything's muddy brown? Okay. So they came up with this concept where they actually take a completely different palette color and show darkness. Okay. Now, when you look at it, your eye kind of fixes it and it looks right. But when you study it, you go, wait a minute. It went from brown to yellow to red to green to show darkness going inside a color. And they did that because if you just keep adding black to it, it just browns out, right? It looks terrible. And so it's neat to look at that. And then union is a concept where two planes come together and there's a fixed, strong line. And so there is no sfumato in that. And sometimes union provides great contrast from front to deep within the picture. Okay, so these are the 4 conical painting modes that artists, especially in the Renaissance, developed and then have been used and leveraged later. And then the last one we have, well, second last one is texture. Texture can be actually, they'll use thick paint, they'll use brush strokes, but they'll also use just technique. So this is a really cool painting, is Holbein's Ambassadors. And basically he is, he's putting this piece together because he wants to do your portrait. He's showing you how good he is at stuff. So if you look and detail it, the garment worn, the fur, the instruments and the tools, it's just incredible. I mean, the detail is unbelievable. And then the piece of resistance is down at the bottom. I don't know, that's that thing down at the bottom is a skull, and he's using forced perspective. So John, come up here and stand right here. Don't trip on the cords, but stand right here and look down at that over here, and just look, get closer. There you go. Now look.
Look down at the,
Yeah.
the skull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you look at it from that angle, I mean, it's perfect. It's the right shape of a skull. And this is the forced perspective that you see today in the sidewalk drawings, right? That make the monster come out of the drawing. But he's just showing off basically, which artists did that a lot. But it's a great example. I mean, look at the curtain right behind them. And this isn't a super high resolution, but it's pretty good. It's just incredible texture. Now they're doing that again. You always got to remind, it's a plank of wood or a piece of canvas. There's no depth there, but they've created it. And then color. So this is Matisse, and he is an interesting guy. He's a European guy, but he painted almost after he went to the Indies and Polynesia. He painted these kind of scenes, and he's making no attempt for realism. He can. Some of the early work he did is just fantastic stuff. You'd look at it and go, "Wow, that's really impressive." It looks, there's a guy and there's holding a pitchfork and he's shoving. Hey, you know, you can see exactly what he's doing. He doesn't care anymore. He's all about the emotion, right? So there's a little bit of cubism concepts here. You know, you can tell it's a woman, but it's not intended to be, you know, a picture, right? It's to give the impression. But what he's trying to convey with the colors is a mood, right? We were in Bern, Switzerland, and we went to this little museum, and they had 4 or 5 pieces from Matisse, which was a huge surprise because I had no idea. There's a lot of art that went to Switzerland during the Second World War. So it's sad, but it was cool to see, and it protected it. And they had several pieces from Matisse, and he is, you know, nobody forgets who he is, because no one paints like this. But it brings a mood, and it lifts your heart when you see his pieces. It's just, you know, the colors he uses and the extravagant construct of the pieces are just cool. It's not somber, it's not sad, it's, you know, it's fun, right? All right. And this is Claude Monet. This is a couple of examples of the Rhone Cathedral. Claude Monet is known for his work with color, with light, and how light changes what the picture is. He painted 30 paintings of the Rhone Cathedral. He painted it from the same apartment, so it's the same view every time. He never left the apartment for 2 years while he painted these. I mean, never, for anything. And there's nothing in the apartment. You know, they brought him food, and he gave him bags of stuff to exit. So an interesting guy, but he did this for the Rhone Cathedral. He did this for what's called the haystacks. He did this for the poppies. He did this for the poplars. And if you ever get a chance to see an exhibit of these, where they've actually brought from, most of these are private collection pieces, brought them together so you can see 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 of them left to right, and just try to figure out his mind and what he was doing. It is spectacular. It's unbelievable. Diane and I went up, they had an exhibit about 15 years ago at the museum in Chicago. Unbelievable, because you can't see them together anymore. I mean, you never see them. I mean, you can see pictures of them, but it's not the same thing. The texture, I mean, huge piles of paint on the canvas. And you got to realize that this view would happen for 15 minutes. Okay. But he may have worked on this for 6 months, which means he's got to wait until the same view comes. And that's partly why he was there 2 years. He needed 2 seasons to get a reproduction of the piece the way he wanted it. But think about that too. I've got 30 pieces sitting around the room, and I look out the window and go, okay, 18, let's get up, let's work on that one. And then the cloud comes over, and okay, 28, let's pull that one over and start working on it. It's just crazy. But it just gives you a feel for how important him understanding and depicting light was. Okay. This is just this, and this is in your thing, and it gives you some background on, okay, when you see a color in a Christian work, what does it mean? So white's purity, red's emotion, gold is kingdom, blue is love, hope, and truth, black is death, but with white is purity of life. Green is victory over death, kind of makes sense, right? Springtime color. Purple is royalty, or God the Father himself. Brown is unification of the world or degradation and spiritual death. You remember one of the pieces we had has a little sash over Mary that's brown. And so you can kind of look at it and go, well, why is it there? What's that mean? And then you got all kinds of icons or symbols that mean different things. Again, it's not completely unified. The colors are pretty good because most of the colors are actually emotionally responsive colors. All of the symbols are created, right? So in different periods, they may change the meaning, but that gives you a little background. So here we're back to Anna Weddle's piece from 2002. This is a 6-year-old. What do you see in here? Why are we looking at Jesus? Okay, we're looking at Jesus because that arc, remember that arc tells you to look up. We're looking at Jesus because all the people here are looking at Jesus. So we had a, well, if you go over the parking lot and you look up, somebody's going to come behind you. So look where you're looking. It's just human nature. You see the stigmata on Jesus. See there with the hands, the side, and the feet. You see that the halos on the 2 good guys and no halo on the bad guy. So it's a real clear indicator there. But again, she was 6 years old. She didn't know any of these things, but her mind did, right? So kind of cool. Anna's actually an artist. She works for Google. Hey, worked out. Way to go, Anna.
We didn't get the, what's the, it's got the fish, the red.
Red's a heart, and the sun is the sun, S-O-N-S-U-N. And the fish is Cairo, right? So the reason the fish is a sign of Christ. You ever seen a fish on the back of a car? That's what it means. That actually comes from the Greek letters Chi, Rho. When you put them together, it looks like a fish. Chi, Rho. And that's why the fish is, you got to remember, in early, after Christ died, early Christianity, you couldn't go around saying, Christ is my guy, on your t-shirt, because that wouldn't go well for you. So a lot of people would be standing around and they would take their foot and they would make a fish. And then if nobody paid attention, you wash it out. And if people looked at you and go, yeah, then you knew who your team was. So kind of neat stuff. All right. So craft and discipline. And again, we're going to go through examples of all these, but basically art is constructed of sketches, etchings and prints, mosaics, sculpture, architecture, painting, stained glass, illuminated manuscript, photography. You got graffiti artists today. You got all kinds of different art. You got, what was that, Anna, you were talking about is the live art. There's a famous artist that does these big overhead scenes of people standing in a certain position, and and then moving, or he puts a bunch of balloons up and
Oh yeah, there's a lot of different performance artists. The name escapes me though. Oh no. Sorry.
So, the thing is, when we look at old art, it's got to be constructed well or it didn't survive, right? It's also got to be lucky to survive because there have been a lot of wars and things. But so it is really important for the artist to have both imagination and technically sound. You got to be both of those things, or the art doesn't exist. This little picture is it is a what if that's supposed to be Michelangelo and he's painting up in his fresco. We'll talk a little bit about frescoes. There's one back there. You can see the creation of Adam. We actually we did that. So we'll talk a little bit about how it's done. It's painted on wet plaster, which means you can only paint on the wet part, which means you can't just plaster the whole thing and then come back and paint it. You have to do little sections at a time. Forced perspective was in reverse for Michelangelo because he's painting on these curved walls and ceilings that are 80 feet high. And he had to create, the construct so you could actually, it looked like a person, not somebody that's plastered against a curved wall. And so he backward designed forced perspective to be able to do that.
How high do you think that ceiling is?
I think at the high point, it's 80. So there's 9 big panels, which is where the creation of Adam is. And that's where it's really tall, really
I
high.
thought maybe you had a really long version.
Well, he also didn't paint it all himself. He did all the sketches. He laid out everything. He would take an awl and etch the wet plaster, and then he would have teams coming in doing, okay, you do yellow, you do brown, you do purple, you do black, fill in this spot. It was really, paint by numbers. That's not true, but you get the point. All right. And then this is a little bit of an intro to where we're going. And I think these next two pieces are kind of cool. This is Bellini. And this is Madonna of the Meadow. Again, look at it and appreciate what it is, but from a stylistic perspective, the infant Jesus is dead. So make a little foreshadowing of what's to come. Over here to the left of Mary is a crane destroying the snake. The snake is the devil. And over to the right is the good shepherd watching his flock, which is a foreshadowing of what Jesus is going to do. He then painted this. It's the same scene. You see the big blue triangle of Mary's garment. Jesus is dead. And you see the stump to his left, which is the cut stump that is resprouted, is life from death. Okay? And you'll see that again and again and again in Christian art. But kind of an interesting in the background, that's a real village back there, and he painted the village, and so people know what that village looked like, back at that time. I don't know if you've ever seen this. This is Michelangelo's Pieta. Okay. It's about 1 inch equals 1 inch. It's massive. It's massive. It actually has a little bit of a green tint to it, but I stood in front of it and I was just weeping. I mean, tears are coming down. It's that emotional to see it. That it's a marble. Florence is surrounded by some of the best marble in the world. People still pull marble out of there to do sculptures. Okay, and it's all about finding a big enough piece without imperfections or cuts in it. So when you do it, it's going to work. This piece sits inside St. Peter's Basilica. Just as you come in, it's to the right. It used to be, you could walk right up to it. Now it has a big piece of plexiglass because some idiot came and knocked Mary's finger off. But when you look at it, the flesh pieces look like flesh. The garments look like garments. It's awesome. So he did this when he was 22 years old, kind of marginally known, gets selected to do it. It was originally intended to be part of a funeral pyre of some third level bishop somewhere. He does it, they display it in the Vatican, and there's a bunch of people standing around, and he hears other people attributing it to someone else, which is the worst thing you can do to a Michelangelo. So Michelangelo, I'm going to step to the side. Then he comes after he'd done the piece, and he writes his name across the sack, because you don't want to get the wrong guy's credit for a piece like this. But as soon as he did it, and as soon as it was displayed, okay, it's not going in where it was going to go. It's going to go in St. Peter's, and it's going to be the thing you see when you walk in. And I don't know if anybody here has seen it, but it is just unbelievable, spectacular. It's about 1=1, a little bit smaller. You got to remember, people were smaller back then, so I think it's pretty much 1 inch is 1 inch. You know,
Single piece.
it's a single piece. Yeah. There's another spectacular piece that he did of David, right? Slaying Goliath. And it's at the university in Florence. And it's at the end of a big hall. And along the hall are these 6 pieces. They're called the prisoners. And they're Michelangelo's. And they're basically these big chunks of stone, marble. And you see a shoulder, see the side of a cheek, you'll see a knee, foot coming out. But the rest of it's just this raw piece of, and he was, again, showing off. When they first found him, they thought they were just in progress works. And then they go, well, wait a minute. When you see a shoulder, it's completely finished. It's just like his knee, right? It's completely finished. But then right next to it is just a raw rock. And then when you step back and look at it, everything is perfectly in perspective. The cheek is where it should be, and the knee is where it should be, and the ankle's where it should be. And you just, and one of the things he said, if you ever want to read a little bit about Michelangelo, read the book Agony and the Ecstasy. It's a story of Michelangelo. And he talks about when he sculpted, which is what he loved. That's what he loved to do. He saw what was in the rock, and all he did was reveal it. So in his mind, it was there. It was already there. God put it there. I'm revealing it. And so when he did the prisoners, you just have this incredible example of exactly what he was talking about. So you got these huge, and these things are gargantuan, just chunks of stone, and they're kind of guarding David. And you look down this thing and you see David, and David is really weird. When you look at it, it's just power, it exudes, yet it's this little kid. It's a little kid, and you can't figure out why is it like that? And when you get closer and closer to it and you start to study it, the hands are twice as big as they should be. The head is 1.5 times as big as it should be. But when you look at it, it doesn't look funny. It doesn't look cartoonish at all. It just exudes power, and that's how he did it. Because what is the power of man? Hands. What is the power of man? Intellect. And it's another one where you just stand in front of it and you just go, oh my God, you are great, right? And
So what did he use to carve that?
chisels and pumice and well, and if you read Agony and the Ecstasy, these guys dealt with big pieces of stone all the time. These guys were built. You know, a lot of times the people that posed for the pieces were guys that were drawing the marble up from the quarries, and so they look like that. You know, that's what they did. There were no hydraulics, and you know, it was just that's what it was. But the sculptors themselves, Michelangelo, if you look at paintings of him, that dude was a man. Like, there's no doubt about it, because it's what he did. You know, he chipped rock all day long, right? So kind of cool. This is a little piece of the Sistine Chapel. The panels across the top, you can see the creation of Adam, right there. There are 9 of those panels, and those are different stories about Old Testament. It drops to New Testament, and down here, you got New Testament mixed with some commentary about the Pope I don't like, and then down at the bottom, you got the Pope with the donkey head and the Pope's concubine with the, you know, with the ape head, and it's all over the place. So when you walk around and actually look at it, you go, how did he get away with this? I mean, it's ridiculous. But it's Michelangelo, so he did. Kind of cool. And again, if you want to look at, you know, the construct of it, how it's made, there's a great book called The Pope's Ceiling that kind of narrates that. And
How much is the field?
I was just talking to Janice, and I said, and Cheryl said, you got to convince Bill to take me there. I go, hey, I would go. I'd take you. Let's go. I mean, I'd love it. I could spend weeks in Florence just walking around. And there's the Uffizi Museum in Florence, which the Uffizi family funded art for 600 years. I don't know how many pieces are inside that. Hundreds of thousands. And some of them are marginal, but some of them are just absolute masterpieces. And you can stand there, you can stare at it for a week. And people do. I mean, that's why wannabe artists from all over the world go there, just to take it in and try to understand, you know, how they made it. We'll talk a bit about this, but I just wanted to, it's just such an iconic piece in the creation of man. And one of the things I want to point out is if you look at Adam and his hand, it's life, but it's not life, right? Versus you look at God's hand, it's intentional, right? And it's going to pass on life. So the other thing is that's Eve there with God. I created all things. I knew with the very beginning what it was going to be. I know at the end what it's going to be, and I had it all here. And so it's just cool. And then the background, what does the background remind you of? It's a human brain. Okay, kind of interesting. And then there's that piece. And I threw these in because I think that obviously what the kind of art that we see today is a lot in movies and film and plays and things like that. And this is an outtake from Mel Gibson's Passion of Christ. And this is where Mary's coming to Jesus. He's trying to get the cross to Golgotha. And there's no words exchanged in this whole scene. And it's the advantage of movies because you can put words in, right? You can show the transition of things, but I think I have a few stills in here that are just unbelievable. You know, this is Christ on the cross. And if you've not seen this movie, it's very, very graphic, right? And this is the last words of Christ, right? But I've got paintings that are just like this, right? From the Renaissance and later. And then this scene is called the deposition. So it's taking the body down. And I think what's interesting here, before I saw this in the movie, I had seen this scene many, many, many times because this is a very popular artist scene, right? To depict the deposition of Christ. And it's the same thing. It is there's rigor mortis set in, right? His life is gone. And he's very stiff. And then there's the carrying of Mary and James and Mary. There's the donator up in the upper left of the tomb. And in the right here is a Roman soldier. Remember the Roman soldier? This must be the Son of God. He's converted right there on the spot. So there's several movies about this. I'm a big John Wayne fan. And so one of the Passion of Christ, John Wayne knew what was going on. It was some famous director, and he wanted to be in it. Didn't want any credits, didn't want to get paid. And he plays the part of this Roman soldier. And that's his only line. This must be the Son of God. And of course, it's John Wayne. You think there's a horse behind him and he should have a 10-gallon hat on. But it's just, that's how important that was to him, right? Not to be recognized, but to touch the story of Christ was what he wanted. So it's kind of cool. And then this is just haunting because Mary is looking at the people that killed her son. It's us, right? Our sin is what he took. But it's an incredible scene, and I just again, art is more than painting, and it's more than sculpture. And I got to give Mel Gibson credit. He got this part of it right, and it touched a lot of people. And then again, here's the references. So I don't even know how we're doing on time, probably overshot. But, I love this stuff. It's a passion of mine. We're going to keep talking. We're going to kind of transition from the construct piece into what was in this last few slides, which is more of, we're going to read the stories. We're going to go from start to finish in his life, and we're going to show you how artists depicted the stories of his life, and why they did it the way they did it. And not all of those artists are Christians, which is interesting. Okay. And we'll talk about how being involved with some of these works changes the hearts of people. We'll talk a little bit about Marc Chagall, who did some stained glass for some Christian churches. And his first foray was, I'll only do Old Testament stories in the stained glass. And he did that. And then he formed a friendship over a period of 30 years with the bishop that was in charge of this church in Mans. And when he was 92 years old, he designed the New Testament stories for the basilica. So you never know. You never know. So I didn't give you any time for any questions, but I appreciate your time. Sorry I went late. And we're going to meet again next Monday, and we'll start with the Annunciation of the birth of John the Baptist and the birth of Jesus, and then we'll go through the birth and a little bit into the adoration piece of it. So thanks for you online people.
Thanks, Dad. That was awesome.
Greg, that was awesome.
You're welcome. Have a great evening.
You too.